Hey folks, this is Dr. Duncan, your BI 101 instructor, and this is a presentation of Unit 14. I'm looking at my syllabus up here, 14b, which is Southern Coastal Plain Wetlands. So this is an interjection into our format for the course to explain wetland ecology and the importance of wetlands. So to get started, here's our file that we're going to be following. This is our PowerPoint. This will be posted for you on Moodle. Wetlands are critically important for many reasons. Certainly in terms of biodiversity conservation, they're important. Many species are found in them, everything from large vertebrates to aquatic plants. Many endangered and threatened species live in Alabama's wetlands because we've lost so many of our wetlands over time. In fact, Alabama has lost over 50% of its wetlands during a 200-year span ending in the 1980s. So biodiversity conservation, very important for that. They're very important economically as well. The water in wetlands seeps down into aquifers and groundwater that supplies drinking water for many communities. Another economic impact for Sorry about that. Another economic impact for wetlands is the food that they provide. So especially on the coast, a lot of the species that are harvested and sustain the seafood industry are species that have a juvenile stage or even an adult stage in the wetlands, such as salt marshes. So without clean, healthy, productive wetlands, that aspect of the economy does not thrive. And that, of course, influences tourism as well. Another ecological and economic value is that wetlands will filter pollution. Maybe it's muddy water that washes into wetlands, and then the silt in that water settles out and becomes part of the mud in that wetland. Sometimes wetlands will take up toxins out of water. Those will get sequestered in plants. The plants wind up taking toxins out of the sediment through their roots. The same thing is true for nutrients. We've already talked about how nutrients can be too much of a problem. Another value is that another economic and ecological value is that wetlands provide flood storage. So when it rains, especially in places where we've developed a lot and the ground doesn't soak up the water, when it rains, that water often winds up or can wind up in a wetland, and that wetland will store that water, slow it down, give it time to sink into the groundwater and so forth, which helps reduce flooding downstream. Another value of wetlands over time has been timber extraction. This is mostly a thing of the past, although in many areas of the southeast they still harvest cypress trees to make, of all things, cypress mulch. So when you go to Lowe's or Home Depot and you buy a bag of cypress mulch that's usually dyed red for some absurd reason, that mulch was a former wetland that they put through the grinder so that you could use that mulch. There are much more sustainable sources of mulch out there, by the way. But back in the day, the harvesting of cypress trees from our swamps was a big deal. Cypress makes great lumber that is naturally resistant to decay. And hang on just a second here. Yeah, don't show that message ever again, thank you. All right. So cypress makes great lumber, and it was highly valued, and most of the big trees were cut down in the southeast. Wetlands are very important for ecotourism. Many of the places where tourists go for hiking or bird watching or hunting, because hunting is a form of ecotourism as well. Many of these places have wetlands. Some of them are focused on wetlands. Take the Wheeler National Wildlife Refuge up in Decatur, Alabama. Thousands, over 100,000 people come there every year, and they're all there to see those wetlands and the wildlife they support. They're important for hunting. Hunting and fishing are big industries in many areas, including the southeast. And hunters and fishers tend to be some of our strongest allies in conservation. So this is another valuable component of our culture, but also our economy. A lot of money is spent on hunting. Everything from the ammunition to the guns. Same is true for fishing. Everything from boats down to the tackle that you use. So this is another important contribution of wetlands to our economy. Now, given all that, you'd think that everybody would be all very excited about wetlands and taking care of them. But wetlands over time have been viewed in very negative ways. I like this quote that I wrote, which is they're seen as God-forsaken places infested with snakes, mosquitoes, diseases, vermin, gators, pirates, criminals, smugglers, rebels, voodoo queens, mud, slime, and stench. Some of those are historic references, others are just general thoughts about wetlands. In general, they've been regarded as useless lands, not for much use in agriculture. They're not good for building structures because of the squishy soils, and they're also very poor for river navigation, especially back in the day when river navigation was the way to get around. So wetlands have been undervalued by society over time. Consequently, we have lost a lot of our wetlands in the U.S. Over 50% of the wetlands have been lost at the national scale, at the U.S. scale, and that is also true in Alabama. Now, we have lost wetlands due to draining and filling them. You see some examples of this on the screen here. Sometimes, for a long time ago, that was done to reduce mosquito populations. That was especially important when we had a lot of malaria and yellow fever in the southeast. In more recent times, especially post-World War II, wetlands were filled in to increase areas for urban sprawl, as you see in the lower left. That's not from Alabama, by the way. I had to borrow that from somewhere else, but you get the idea of what has happened to wetlands with urban sprawl. And then sometimes they've been damaged for increased navigation. The picture in the lower right are the Louisiana wetlands. Those are all canals that have been developed for increased navigation for the oil and gas industry down there. Alabama, I said before, had lost 50% of its wetlands. I see now that I later found a better statistic that puts it at 63%. So we are above the national average in terms of total wetland loss in Alabama. Make sure you make that change in your notes. Now, you watched a video as part of this unit about wetland loss in coastal Louisiana. While Louisiana is obviously not part of Alabama, it is, however, a state with many similar characteristics. And these wetlands that we have in Louisiana is our largest contiguous expanse of wetlands on the continent in North America. So they're very important ecologically, but also culturally for all those reasons that we've talked about. And what you see in this map is how much wetland loss there's been between the year 1932 and 2000. The projected land loss is in yellow, so things are going to be continuing, and that's projected between the year 2000 and 2050. It's not quite as rapid because of now we have laws about protecting wetlands, but we are going to continue to lose wetlands because of sea level rise, something that's related to climate change, as we'll talk about in another unit. Now, the Louisiana wetlands became part of a national conversation about wetlands, at least briefly, after Hurricane Katrina, because if you recall, in Hurricane Katrina, over 2,000 people died, and many of them died because they drowned and they were trapped in their homes and in other structures in New Orleans. And the reason New Orleans got hit by so much water has to do with several factors. One of them is that there has been so much loss of the marshlands to the south of New Orleans. Had the marshlands been healthy and intact and at their full extent, it would have absorbed a lot of water that didn't come roaring up the river and into flooding into New Orleans. And it's quite likely that the death toll would have been substantially lower if our wetlands had been in good shape down there. Now, how does this work? So why do these coastal marshes help protect areas against storm surges from hurricanes? Well, for one thing, those marshes will slow winds down. Winds will move much more swiftly over open water than it will over even a marsh. And of course, as I mentioned, it will absorb the storm surge water and sort of store it in those habitats. So the wetland loss, to summarize, and this is back from the map before, the wetland loss in South Louisiana is the equivalent of about 40 football fields per day since the 1970s. That is not a typo. That is not mishearing what I just said. It's 40 football fields a day. Now that seems like an astronomical amount, and it is. But you imagine all these little tiny islands out there, some the size of you know, a classroom desk or something like that, every day losing just a little bit of its perimeter, and all those perimeters add up to lead to wetland loss. Another figure is that it's 66 square kilometers per year. You can go online to convert that to miles if you like to see what that would be in terms of miles. All right. The loss of Louisiana wetlands have been contributed to several things. Number one, levees that have been put along the Mississippi River that have prevented floodwaters from naturally going out into the marshes and delivering sediment. Now, marsh sediments are very soft and squishy, and over time they compact, just as gravity pulls them and tugs on them over time. So when you don't let your rivers naturally flood into the wetlands, then your marshes become starved of sediment, and as a consequence, their position at sea level cannot stay constant. It winds up going down because of the compression of those sediments. If instead you were having continued supply of sediments with every flood, then even though the sediments are compressing down, you get new stuff layered on top, and that keeps you in place. And that's one of the problems that we've had in Louisiana and other wetlands that have been modified throughout the southeast and the world. Another factor is sea level. Sea level can change, and as it changes relative to the land, we call that relative sea level change. Absolute sea level change is based on how much water is in the ocean, and of course that is changing too as the glaciers are melting, as there's more ice being released from Antarctica with the warming. Hang on, that's my timer to tell me to shut up soon. As a consequence, absolute sea level is increasing right now at about a centimeter every decade. That's about the rate, and we'll get into that more when we talk about climate change. So these are some of the factors that have caused loss of Louisiana wetlands. I'm going to end with this section here, and then we'll pick it up in the next video.